Gavin sir, we have let everyone in. Okay, so everyone's as they join. I guess
We can
we can
start.
begin.
Don't
Yeah,
worry about that, Kushal. We can
right.
start.
So welcome everyone to this final webinar on law, technology, and social justice. The webinar has been part of the larger collaboration between the Johannesburg University and Nirma, Institute of Law, Nirma University. We have with us four speakers that we will be introducing. Nicole will be introducing the speakers in a moment's time. But just to give a broad, overview of the seminar, law and technology. I mean, it started. The idea was to understand some of the immediate concerns in a highly technological world that we find ourselves living in. At least in the Indian context, we have some very immediate concerns of privacy, of automation. So the idea was to look at what these concerns hold, what they mean, and how we can talk about them, coming from a legal background. And also, although a lot of work has now happened in this field of law and technology, where scholars have written about the question of responsibility, for instance. So if we are talking about a digital age in litigation, how do the some of the more conventional notions of responsibility get interpreted, and what are the lacunas that we could identify. And also health sector being something where a lot of new technology has been introduced in the last few years, with technologies like IVF and a lot more. While a lot of scholarship has happened on all of this, there still is, I think, in Indian academia, basically a black hole where we're not systematically talking about law and technology. We don't really have any courses on law and technology. Uh, so that was the intention, to at least start a discussion here and perhaps take it forward, and to also understand what are the concerns in the South African context in law and technology. Uh, Now, as I said, there are actually different streams of thought within this broader field of law technology. One that has been called also as law and technology enterprise, where we identify what the problem is, and where we see from a law and policy perspective what we can do to bridge to cover up these loopholes. So if we have a problem of privacy, what laws can we make to address those issues of privacy? But different scholars have also written about how actually law participates, or law rather uh, creates the problem in the first place. So where they say that technology is not simple application of scientific data and scientific research, but technology is also a deeply political process. So what technologies do you implement? I mean, both law and technology in that sense are contested spheres. They are spheres of contesting values. So what kind of technologies get implemented, and the role that law plays in implementing those technologies, these are kinds of conversations that have also taken place. I think another kind of conversation that can take place is, how do we understand technology? Is technology just something which is the complicated devices that we see today, or man naturally is a technological being? So when we talk, when we walk, when we are interacting with people, all of that is also technology. So in that sense, does it really make sense to talk about in binary terms of, is technology a good thing or is technology a bad thing? Do we have technology or do we not have technology? If man is a technological being, then do we really have a choice of not having technology? And within those frameworks, scholars try to bring in different philosophical frameworks of technology. And we have people talking about being in a world with technology, borrowing their terminologies from someone like Martin Heidegger. So a lot of work, and if we do live in a world where not getting rid of technology is not an option, then what does it mean for us? People have actually worked on it and written about how we can actually understand legal concepts of responsibility, once we accept that we are going to be in a world with technology, and that technology is not just something that humans perform, it's a collective action. It's a collective, coming together of multiple factors. So it is actually to just explore. Personally, it was to explore some of these ideas that this seminar on law and technology was conceived. We also, in conversations with our South African counterparts, we wanted to understand how the South African community is looking at technology. What are some of the immediate concerns, or I mean, I don't just mean concerns in a negative sense, but concerns in a productive sense, in a way. So we wanted to know what the South African perspective is, and it's on these lines that we've tried to design this seminar. We have 4 very interesting speakers lined up who are going to be speaking on different topics. But first of all, I'd like to invite Megan to say a few words about the webinar. And Megan, as you all know, Megan is a lecturer in the Department of Public Law at the University of Johannesburg and an editor of Constitutional Court Review. Megan also holds bachelor's in social science and LLB degrees from the University of Cape Town and a BCL degree from Oxford University. She's currently a PhD candidate at the University of Witwatersrand. Witwatersrand, I hope pronounce that properly. And Megan has also served as a law clerk of the Constitutional Court and is an admitted advocate of the High Court of South Africa. She has previously practiced at the Johannesburg Bar and appeared as counsel in a number of reported judgments, including of the Constitutional Court. So welcome, Megan. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much, Kushal, and thank you for that really helpful, I think, and insightful conceptual background and normative background to today's webinar. I'll just say a few small things about the collaboration. So this is the 4th webinar. This collaboration has been the product of almost a year of discussions between the University of Johannesburg and Nirma University. And the 4 seminars have really been, the overarching theme has been social justice, continuum, and comparative context. And the seminars have kind of been united by a number of different kind of ideological and normative explorations. So first, the fact that both India and South Africa are countries that are marred by histories of inequality, of colonialism, and the role that law has, and particularly constitutions, which in both countries at least aspire to be transformative in some way, the role that law has to try and address these broad social concerns, and the extent to which law can and cannot act as a lever for positive social change. So this 4th seminar is on law and technology. The first 3 that preceded it were, the first one was on equality, gender, LGBTQI+ rights and anti-discrimination law. The second was on labor law, really looking at vulnerable workers and laborers in the context of migrancy and climate change. The third was looking at pedagogy, so really legal education and the role of legal education. And then today finally is looking at law and technology. And I really can't say much beyond what Kushal has already said with a great deal of insight and incisiveness already. But really we're just, looking against the backdrop of the 4th Industrial Revolution. We're grappling with the wider acceptance and use of emerging digital technologies by the state, and really whether or not those technologies ameliorate or exacerbate social exclusion. And again, just echoing what Kushal was saying earlier, moving away from a kind of binary approach to assessing that. Before I hand over, I just want to say there has been a significant program change. Unfortunately, Dr. Naveen Tayal has become unwell. And so we're very, very grateful to Dr. Arun Prasad, who has stepped in at short notice. We're really looking forward to your presentation, but I wanted to particularly say thank you for being so willing to address us all today. We're really grateful for that. So thank you to you all. The final thing from me is that these 4 webinars are ultimately going to culminate in a book, hopefully coming out in 2022, which is an edited volume of essays. So watch this space for that. And that's it from me. So over to you, over to you, Nicole. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. I hope you enjoy our final webinar.
Thanks a lot, Megan. Before Nicole comes in, I'd just like to introduce Nicole. Nicole is the co-coordinator for today's session, and Nicole has completed her LLB degree and her LLM degree also in labor law at the University of Johannesburg, and she completed both of her degrees cum laude, and she received the Chancellor's Medal for the Best Master's Degree Student in the Faculty of Law 2017. Nicole has also served articles as a candidate attorney at Bowman's, at one of the top 5 law firms in South Africa. And she's admitted as an attorney of the High Court of South Africa, and she's currently employed as an assistant lecturer in the Public Law Department at Johannesburg University, where she's also completing her PhD in constitutional law. So welcome, Nicole, and thanks a lot for everything, and over to you.
Thanks, Kushal. I also have the honor of introducing you. Kushal Nandwani is working as an assistant professor at Institute of Law, Nirma University. He possesses Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and LLB from Delhi University, and LLM in Law and Development from Azam Premji University. He's teaching courses on jurisprudence, sociology of law, and public interest lawyering at Nirma University. He's interested in the field of legal theory and legal anthropology. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today's session, and we'll be discussing state technology and the human person, and that is Dr. Usha Rahman. I hope I'm pronouncing your surname correctly. Dr. Usha Rahman works on the jurisprudence of law, poverty, and rights. She researches rights and speaks on public policy. She has been tracking and engaging with the Uid Project and has written and debated extensively on issues of technology and the human conditions of freedom and liberty over the years. She was awarded Access Now's Human Rights Heroes Award in 2019. She has been a member of a series of committees on revising the vagrancy law, including the expert group on privacy in 2012, review committee on the draft Human DNA Profiling Bill 2012, high-level committee set up by the Prime Minister's office to study the socioeconomic status of tribal communities, which gave its report to the government in 2014. Over to you, Dr. Ramanathan.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I'm not very sure I'm going to be good at setting the tone, but I will just, use my tone and say what I'm going to say. First, I want to start with saying this, that this 20 years past has actually been fascinating in terms of technology. And I think we broadly know what kind of technologies we are talking about. We are not talking about, the earlier technologies which kind of helped us to move faster, which physically. We are now talking about what started off as information and communication technology, which has grown into something much more than that. And it's been fascinating because in the first 10 years of this century, I think all of us will recall the extraordinary excitement that the new technologies produced in our midst. The idea that you could see the whole world through a machine, you would know instantly what is happening in any part of the world, you can participate in what is happening in various ways in many parts of the world. Everybody had a mobile phone, and that mobile phone connected us in ways, or I should actually say connected you, since I never had a mobile phone, but it connected people, instantly wherever they were. You didn't have to wait to reach your home or to reach a telephone booth to be able to call up people. They were very exciting times, and technology produced a whole new, I won't say imagination, but it certainly dislodged much of the imagination that had existed before. The second decade of this century has not been as comforting. And we have seen the ambition. See, technology could have, I mean, as we see it, some of us see it, technology could have gone in one of two ways. One, it could have traveled as a companion and as a not a tool, but something that would facilitate lives of people. So they would be, technology would be something that people would use. That was one possible way in which technology could grow. The other way in which technology could move, and unfortunately that seems to, in large measure, to be the way in which it has been moving, it's been about technology producing new kinds, new forms of power relationships, new kinds of ambitions about what can be done with people, new ways of thinking about redundancy and dispensability of people and of relevance of people. So it's been, it's kind of unrolled itself over this decade. And we've all, I see this meeting that we have now and Kushal's statement that we are looking for this to be introduced into universities as being a statement of how much it has come to dominate our lives. And we can't afford not to know. I would, of course, at this point, just put in one word of caution that the thing with creating syllabi is that it very often generates passive learning. What is there, and then you learn that, and that's what you know. I think at this stage in the life of technology in relation to the human person, we need to be far more critical, critical than that. So I see as, on two sides of this, of this debate, people who are techno-utopians, who are at one extreme, and, those who reject technology at the other extreme. I place myself somewhere in between as a techno-skeptic, which I wasn't till this last decade started. Till then, I wasn't really thinking technology too much. Arab Spring produced a certain kind of possibility, which has quickly sunk into something else. So I'll just set out as a, and the discussion, of course, will go on, but just set out some of the ways in which we have seen this technology evolve in our midst and the use of this kind of technology. So just stepwise, if I were to look, the first stage, which started actually in the 1990s and a little bit, in India, it's perhaps probably the 1990s that started this, which is digitization. So all that was held as, as physical records could now get digitized. And I think there was a lot of, approbation for that, because it would streamline various systems. It wouldn't require paper could get lost. There could be various things that happen with paper, and many other things can be seen when you digitize. You can, for instance, like we found in our cooking gas, digitization of people for whom it is delivered. We found that when they digitized, they were able to see where the duplicates were emerging, because a lot of the time the duplicates are not because people are fake or people are fraudulent. It is that the system wouldn't work to enable them to strike themselves off in one list before they get on to it again. So all that got streamlined. And so digitization was seen as a reasonably, in fact, as a good thing. But then around in 2009, we started with this Uid project, which is the Unique Identification Project, otherwise known by its brand name of Aadhaar. And the fact that a government project needs a brand name should make us think about what that means. So it started off in 2009. Some of the facts that hit us, even when it began, first, that it started without any kind of a report, no white paper, green paper, blue paper, brown paper, no paper at all. Just a notification, an executive notification, and that's it. It was set in place. The second thing was that it was talking about ownership of that database. A database was going to be created with the identities of people in it. And for the first time, we heard this idea that our data could be owned by somebody else. Till then, the idea always was that when we give our information to any institution, and certainly when we give it to the state acts as a custodian of that information. It acts in a fiduciary capacity when it uses that information. But the idea that the state owned that data, or whoever we gave it to could own that data, that did not exist before 2009. The third thing that struck us was that 6 months into the project, the person who was appointed as the chairperson of that project came from industry. And it came from a technology company. Mr. Nandan Nilekani was one of the founding members of, one of the founders of Infosys, which is one of our largest companies. And so industry was being asked to come in and assist the government, actually run it. It wasn't even assisting the government. It was to create a whole system which would database a whole population. It is possible that the government wanted him because he would carry with him the experience that they had of technology. But it is also true that businesses run for profit. So the way in which technologies are created, the way in which they are used would foreground the idea of profit at some stage or the other. So this was the other thing that had us, got us wary. And the thing about it also was that he was brought into this project with the status of a cabinet minister, but without the responsibilities of one, which meant that all the privileges of the cabinet minister would exist. But the basic thing of a minister in government having to answer a people did not exist. So there was neither any paper telling us anything, nor was there answer. And that's how this project began. So from digitization, we moved into this ID project. And this ID project decided early on that they would use biometrics as one of the ways for deduplicating the whole population. Now, for those who believe that biometrics is a relatively secure and accurate science, they may not have worried themselves with it. But for us, when we heard that biometrics was going to become a part of the project, we also started seeing what kind of documents were coming from within the UIDAI itself, within the organization. And we found that they were basically saying that fingerprints alone will not be enough. Initially, they thought it will only be fingerprints. They said that alone will not be enough. So now you have to also add iris. Neither had been tested. And their own document said, not just in India, but nowhere in the developing world has this been tested on any scale of population. It is true that the FBI used to collect that information, and it was a much smaller number. The numbers were in the millions, whereas we are in, hundreds of millions. So they said that even if that had been done, the idea of using it to determine the identity of a person and to have their whole civic life tied up with an ID of this kind, that didn't measure up at all from their own internal documents. So we knew that this was an untested method that was being rolled out on a whole population. For those who are watching how companies and how technology and pharma companies actually use the whole world, and especially the developing world, as experimental spaces, this will come as no surprise. I mean, I was new to it at that time. I was thinking of other ways of thinking about industry, but not this. And I got introduced to it through this. The third is that what this led to was the creation of databases, the idea of databasing population. So the three words that were used right in the beginning when the project started, the three words were unique, ubiquitous, and universal. So while many of us thought in the beginning that uniqueness had to do with biometrics, we realized that it actually doesn't. It's not about biometrics. It's about every person being identified by a unique number. So at one of the meetings that was held in either the World Bank or the Center for Global Governance, Mr. Nilekani was asked this question. They said, if you can database, 1 billion people, 1.3 billion people, what's to stop you from doing it to 7 billion, which is the population of the world? And after a bit of hedging, finally he had to admit that, well, yes, it can be done. So the thinking that you can actually have all of the world's population on databases which can be accessed. And in the World Bank, it was said that, so if there is somebody standing in Nairobi at a ATM, and if a woman is standing there and she's using the ATM, I may not know that what she's using it to do, but I would know that she's standing there and using that ATM. Is that right? And they had to say yes, because that's the way in which technology was being conceived. So this idea of databasing is not just about getting an ID and putting the person's basic information on one database. It was about using that number to infiltrate every database so that tying up all of this would become much simpler. So we keep hearing this, that no, it's very basic information that's kept in the UIDAI database. The point is not even that. The point really is that this number then has to be on every other database, failing which, and we have seen this happen around us, it can result in civil death, which basically means if you can't identify yourself to these various databases, whether it was to get food or to get health or to get your land records taken care of, anything, to enter school, for employment, in none of these will you find that you can establish yourself as being yourself unless you're going to be on that database. So multiple databases getting people populated with this. The fourth came in when we were looking at fintech. I mean, from the beginning, finance was the first point of entry that they were looking at. So fintech became the big game. And we all know that around the world, fintech is the big game. And the words that were used to explain the excitement that technology had about fintech was that it would be cashless, paperless, and presenceless. Now, in this, I mean, we can discuss each of these, but the one that I'll just mention now is presenceless, where the thing was that I don't need to see you. I don't need to know who you are. I just need to know about the thing about you that I need to know. Do you have money? Are you moving that money around? For me to know that is enough. So every time it will be projected like it's a help to the person, but it's actually the possibilities of technology that is pushing this. So like our RTI activists always tell us, paperless basically means no trail that we can follow. Cashless means that you can't be anonymous anymore. And presenceless means that it's not just that you are presenceless, you don't know who's at the other end of this. So all systems of accountability, all systems of transparency, everything comes into question. Then we had a moment, which was a dramatic moment in Indian constitutional history, where the government went to the court when the UID case it had been taken to court as a case. And in 2015, the government went to the court and said, people of this country don't have a right to privacy. And they said that in the context of the UID case, which they were not doing in the case. In other courtrooms, there was instance from criminal law, the offense of defamation, because they were saying that we need to recognize the privacy. But in the UID case, they were saying no question of privacy. It became it was pretty clear by then actually that if the right to privacy is to exist, these ambitions of technology cannot proceed. And that became clear quite soon. And as this progressed, we also found that the logic was of innovation. One of the things that was constantly said, this wasn't the only thing, but it's an important aspect of it, where they said innovation will be stifled if there are rules. Therefore, we should be able to operate outside of rules when we are innovating, and then we can make rules that will fit the innovation. So privacy, therefore, had to be given a go by, and rules would be made to fit whatever technology companies and technology controllers produced. Then we came up with another notion of what is called Trickle Up Theory. This is something Mr. Nilekani spoke at an Economic Times Summit. And, in India, we had this when we became independent, and we were looking for how we've got to grow so that it can feed the whole population. We had the idea of trickle down, which is that if you create enough, then you will also be able, some of it will trickle down and it will reach everybody. That did not work. And we know, there is a history to what happened with that. Now they were talking about the reverse, where they were saying that in the West, people have become money rich, economically rich, before they've become data rich. Whereas in our country, people are not economically rich. They're not economically wealthy, but they have a wealth of data that they can offer up. So the data of every person was to move upwards and reach the state. And then the state would use it, deploy it for increasing the economy, for growing the economy. And to justify this, in the Shri Krishna Committee report, which is the report that was to, when the case was going on at the Supreme Court, to the court, they had to say that we will set this committee up, which will look at privacy and data protection. In that report, they said that, it is individual, by then the Supreme Court had given its verdict a resounding yes for privacy. So they couldn't deny the right to privacy anymore. But they said, it works like this. Individuals have the right to privacy so that they can give it up for the community. It's a strange way of looking at the world and looking at rights. But this is what was being promoted. And so the idea of trickle up then led to the next notion, which is of data as a public good, which is saying that, all the data that you have, it's not really yours. And in 2012, we had a policy document, which of course never got discussed anywhere, but just got, the government had the document, where they said, they had some discussions at the time that they made it with a few people, with a few organizations. And they produced this document where they said that every department of the government that holds any data of the people, it will be their property. That data will be their property. The idea of the state as a property holder and a property owner, again, was a new kind of phenomenon. And they were claiming it without so much as a by your leave. Nobody asked us if we wanted to hand over our property to the state. So this was the next stage of it. And now we come to data as a public good, where the idea is that all our data should be available so that the economy can grow. People will make various products out of it. So apart from our data protection law, we had another committee that was set up. Data protection report. We had another committee that was set up, which was to look at a non-personal data governance framework. Again, this was the head of this committee was a person who was one of the founders of Infosys. And they had this report where they said, any data that is in the public domain and any data that can be anonymized, it is fine for that data to be used by everyone. It's no longer your personal information. It is, it's information that can be used by anybody. And they even created an idea that any institution, any company, anybody who's got data with them, because they are collecting it as part of the basic business that they are doing, when it reaches a certain threshold, they will then be converted into what is called a data business. So it's a whole strange new world. It's not just a brave new world. It's a whole strange new world. What this has meant is that people can't escape the view, the vision of the state on you. So if you want to get out of sight of everybody peering into every aspect of your life. So now when I say ubiquity, they've been talking about putting it into food, into work, into the databases that relate with these interests and entitlements. So it's food, and then it's land, it's health, it's schooling, it is finance, it's labor. So I just want to pause here for 1 minute to say that when I was listening to the session on labor, I was a little disturbed to find that people were, actually thinking it's a good thing that the government now has a database into which all unorganized sector workers will register themselves. And that, now you have to make sure, the approach was to say that we all have to make sure that all unorganized workers find themselves on that database. Like that database will produce something for the worker. And it's fascinating when we read things in parts and when we read them as a whole, when you actually look at the statute, the social security code that the government has introduced in our midst. Now, it's in that they say that every unorganized sector worker has to register themselves. What do they offer them in return? They offer them
Dr.
an
Usha,
insurance.
sorry to interrupt you. Can you please wind it up in a minute and a half? Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I'm done in a minute. I started at 1:15. I'll finish at 1:35.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. This 30 seconds I'll take for myself now. So just to say this, because it's part of another conversation that, when you say, give me just a second. Yeah. So when you're talking about this database that gets created, there is the promise is that there will be some insurance in case something dramatic happens to you. The other thing that they say is if you are not on that database, then you will not be entitled to many of those things that will be offered to people on that database. So if the state has any programs, if you're not on that database, then you won't find yourself eligible for it. So the systems that have been created, produce various ways of exclusion when they promised inclusion. They are practicing mandatoriness and coercion where they promised voluntariness, and easy ways of surveillance and easy use of data as a commercial product is what we are seeing. So this phase, this 20 years, this 10 years, we need to turn back. And I think that's the kind of critical thinking that I'm hoping will happen, in this session, but also, across time and across circumstance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramanathan. I'd like to introduce our second speaker for the session. We'll be discussing microinsurance and the role of digitalization as a means of social justice for vulnerable workers, and that is Dr. Samantha Yunaber. Dr. Samantha Yunaber is a senior lecturer in the Department of Mercantile Law at the University of Johannesburg. She teaches on the undergraduate level as well as the module on insurance law to LLM students. Dr. Yunaber conducts research in the area of insurance law and more recently specializing in new technologies in the insurance industry. She has published numerous articles in this field and has a keen interest in how new technologies may influence the insurance industry. Also, I just want to say that we'd be taking questions in the chat, so you could either send it to me or Kushal. Over to you, Dr. Yunaber.
Gagan,
I think you're on mute.
I think she's not able to unmute. Gagan, sir, can we look into this?
Thank you. Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I see I also can't share my screen. So if someone can please assist me with that.
Okay.
Thank you. There we go. I've got it. Thank you. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Good morning and good afternoon to our colleagues in India. Thank you everyone for being here today. Today I will be discussing microinsurance and the role of digitalization as a means of social justice for vulnerable workers. But I'd also just like to say that this will go beyond vulnerable workers and really touch on the impact that this can have on vulnerable people at large. So I want to start off with a quote, which was made by Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, in which he made a keynote address at the United Nations General Assembly in 2003. And he said the following. He said, the stark reality is that most poor people in the world still lack access to sustainable financial services, whether it is savings, credit, or insurance. The great challenge before us is to address the constraints that exclude people from full participation in the financial sector. Together, we can and must build inclusive financial sectors that help people improve their lives. And from this, it really is evident that financial exclusion remains a ubiquitous issue worldwide, especially in developing and emerging countries such as South Africa and India. And from that, I want to take what is financial inclusion? We talk about the fact that people are financially excluded. So what can we refer to when we speak of financial inclusion? So financial inclusion can broadly be defined as the development and provision of affordable financial products and services to all persons in a country by the relevant government, banks and or other institutions or role players, for example, insurers, which is what I will obviously be touching on. So this then leads me to a survey that was conducted by the Financial Sector Conduct Authority in South Africa in 2017, where they conducted this survey based on financial literacy within the South African market. So I'm going to touch on the findings that this survey brought in terms of insurance products. And what it was found is that the majority of the adult population in South Africa do not own short-term insurance products. They found that 4/5 of the general population had no short-term insurance products, and the most widely held product type was vehicle insurance. And further to that, it was only 1/10 of the general public that reported owning this type of product in 2017. As far as homeowners insurance is concerned, what was found there is that this was the least popular product in the table, with less than 4% of the public holding this type of product. So looking at changes over the period, there seems to be a mild decline in this type of ownership when it comes to this specific type of insurance product. Further to that, they also found that the largest decline was on household contents insurance, where the survey actually found that the portion of adult South Africans who held this type of product halved between 2012 and 2017. Now, as far as the most widely held type of insurance product in South Africa is concerned, we see here that most South Africans will take out life insurance, medical aid schemes, and burial society products. So the average South African was far more likely to hold a funeral product of some sort. So funeral coverage with an undertaker was the most widely held of all the financial products. And interestingly, this actually represents an increase of 8% since 2012. So the number of South Africans who belong to a burial society increased between 2011 and 2012, which obviously now indicates the growing popularity of institutions such as insurance providers. Now, as far as the South African government and what our South African government is doing towards promoting financial inclusion, it is interesting to note that the South African government have actually implemented a national development plan in the form of a financial inclusion policy. Now, the aim of this policy is to ensure that greater financial inclusion delivers measurable socio-economic benefits in improving the quality of life for all South Africans, particularly that of low-income earners. And that really is the market that I want to be focusing on, because I will be discussing microinsurance, which is really aimed towards low-income earners. So I just want to focus on a few of the most important aspects in terms of this policy document and those relating to insurance. You will see that priority 6 of this policy document aims to promote appropriate, affordable, and quality insurance for the specific target market. Now, what is good to note here is that we do in fact recognize microinsurance. So therefore, that is already a good start because we do have the product. Now, priority 16 of the policy document, interestingly, refers to the leveraging of fintech disruptors to promote and support financial inclusion. Now, I know the previous speaker, my learned colleague, just spoke about fintech, so you all have this idea, and I hope that I will touch on it in a little bit more of a positive aspect. Our government is hoping to leverage fintech in order to promote and support financial inclusion. And this priority 16 further entails developing a fintech policy which is informed by financial inclusion, with the latter being one of the key objectives of that policy. So it is wonderful that our government has this national development plan, which is aimed towards financial inclusion. Obviously, I'm only focusing on the insurance part, but we see that as far as having an insurance product is concerned, we do recognize microinsurance in South Africa, which is a good start. And we also now see that the government is recognizing the possible role of financial technology in promoting financial inclusion in the market. Now, as far as contextualizing vulnerable workers and social justice is concerned, because this really is the underlying theme here. So I want to touch on these concepts of financial inclusion. So, who is financial inclusion geared towards, as well as why is financial inclusion such a pertinent and necessary initiative? So we know that financial inclusion is to afford all members of society access to affordable and suitable financial products. And that can be from banking to credit to savings to insurance. Now, who is a worker in the South African context? So just recently, and this was put forward in terms of the National Minimum Wage Bill, and it was just approved by NEDLAC as well, worker means any person who works for another or who receives or is entitled to receive any payment for that work, whether in money or in kind. So what we can see is this term of worker really goes far beyond that of just an employee. It's really taking into account a much wider group of individuals. Now, as far as social justice is concerned, the United Nations said that social justice may broadly be understood as the fair and compassionate distribution of the fruits of economic growth. And you see there that when we speak of social justice and economic growth are very important aspects that come about. And therefore, that's why I believe that microinsurance really can play such an important role in this regard. As far as South Africa is concerned, the Social Justice Initiative Project said that today, social justice projects in South Africa concern themselves with economic justice, public participation and socioeconomic rights, accountability, and improved access to services in a range of different sectors. This now leads me to the concept of microinsurance. So what is microinsurance? Microinsurance is the protection of low-income individuals against specific perils in exchange for regular premium payments, which are proportionate to the likelihood and cost of the risk involved. Now, what we see is that this is essentially the same definition as traditional insurance, except for the target market, which is our low-income individuals. Now, who is microinsurance intended for? We see that it's generally intended for individuals that have been ignored by mainstream commercial and social insurance schemes and who have previously not had access to appropriate products. So in South Africa, one can actually refer to the definition of microinsurance business, which can be found in our latest Insurance Act 18 of 2017. And further to that, why is there a need for microinsurance? I mean, I just mentioned that it's intended for those individuals that have in fact been ignored previously. So why do we now need to recognize a specific type of product for these individuals that have been ignored by mainstream insurance schemes? Well, firstly, we know that risk affects everybody. Devastating events can render people destitute. And we know further to that the poorer the victim, the worse the outcome. Now, affordable risk management tools such as insurance may enable people to overcome adverse consequences. And further to that, why there's even a greater need for microinsurance is we know that generally insurance is not a popular risk management tool. Insurance is generally seen to be a grudge purchase. Most people do not want to take out insurance because they do not see the value in it. So it is generally seen as a grudge purchase, and that is why it is so necessary that we have this specific type of product that really is designed and suitable for the correct target market, which is our lower income individuals. Now, who is the customer for microinsurance products? So I attended a presentation a few years back where Ginger Turner from Swiss Re presented some statistics, which was done by Beamer Leapfrog Labs in 2014. And what they did, they undertook a survey. And in terms of the survey, it was conducted in 5 countries in Africa and South Asia in early 2014. And that survey revealed that of the mobile microinsurance users sampled, the 97% of them actually lived below $10 per person per day. Of those people surveyed, 77% had never held any form of private insurance, and 42% had no savings account. And that then really leads us to, why do we need this type of product? And, is it suitable for these lower income individuals, vulnerable workers, vulnerable people at large? And we see that this product can actually offer and alleviate some of the financial pressures that our lower income, vulnerable people in society actually face on a daily basis. Now, as far as the South African legislation is concerned, we have in fact recognized microinsurance in terms of our latest Insurance Act, which I did mention previously. So traditional insurance products basically cover a variety of risks, but we also know that these are generally inadequate, particularly judging from the uptake of them. So we know that there was this need for microinsurance because generally the uptake of your formal products, they were not in fact adequate for this specific market in our society. Now, a bit of background to the introduction of microinsurance. The idea of microinsurance was actually put forward as early as 2008 in South Africa, when the South African National Treasury first released a discussion paper on the future of this type of insurance in South Africa for public comment. From that discussion paper, we then got the microinsurance policy document in 2011. And what this document basically highlighted was important aspects such as access, affordability, stronger consumer protection, and it also recognized the need for this minimum product features and standards that microinsurance products had to have. So with that, then, we saw the formal introduction of microinsurance in terms of our Insurance Act of 2017, which became effective on the 1st of July 2018. Very importantly, we also see that there were specific rules implemented on these types of products in terms of our policyholder protection rules. And one can find these rules in Rule 2A. This Rule 2A became effective from the 1st of October 2018. And what you'll see is that there are two sets of rules. There's the policyholder protection rules for short-term insurance and that for long-term insurance. And in both sets of those PPRs, you will find Rule 2A, which sets out the specific rules and standards for those micro-insurance products. Now, just quickly to understand the aims of the Insurance Act, it was to create a legal framework which is consistent with our constitution, promote a fair, safe, and stable insurance market, and that most important one, which is our third one, which is to create a legal framework to promote financial inclusion. So it's obviously very fitting that microinsurance was now introduced in terms of this new Insurance Act, where one of those main aims is to promote financial inclusion. Now, just briefly, I don't have a lot of time to go into this, but just briefly, if you were to go look at Rule 2A of the policyholder protection rules, and you can find it in both the life and non-life product sections, just in terms of the structure of the policy benefits for microinsurance policies, we see that there's certain monetary caps. We also see that there's a maximum 12-month contract term. And interestingly enough, no average clauses are allowed in terms of a microinsurance policy. I won't go through each of these, but I will touch on some of the most important aspects. So, for example, when it comes to excess payments, in terms of Rule 2A, you will actually find that if an excess is payable under a microinsurance policy, then such excess must be disclosed to the policyholder before inception of the policy. So very important there. The most, I think, noteworthy part of Rule 2A comes in with claims, because we know that it is generally a claim stage where policyholders find a lot of issues with the policies. And we know that a lot of the times the insurers will try and repudiate claims. And generally it's at that claim stage where a lot of problems come in. And we also see that sometimes the insurers try to really take their time in paying out claims. So very interestingly, when it comes to claims, it states in Rule 2A that a microinsurer must, within 2 business days after all required documents in respect of a claim under a microinsurance policy have been received, they must assess and make a decision whether or not the claim submitted is valid, and then obviously authorize payment of the claim, or then choose to repudiate the claim or dispute the claim and notify the claimant of the dispute. So obviously putting a very tight time frame, 2 days, but there's a lot of sort of debate around this, where it has been said that due to the simplicity of these types of policies, it should be possible for the insurers to actually make that decision within 2 days, which you can obviously see is very necessary for those individuals who are in your lower income market. I mean, they don't have access to funds which they can just access at any time. So therefore, they would need those claims to be paid out efficiently. So a very notable rule in terms of our microinsurance policies. And also interestingly, further it goes on in Rule 2A 9.3, is it stipulates that a microinsurer may not repudiate a claim under a microinsurance policy on the basis that the policyholder did not disclose information if the microinsurer did not specifically request the policyholder to disclose that information before the inception of the policy. This is a major change from what we see in terms of your normal or sort of typical, your commercial types of insurance policies. So this rule on non-disclosure is in fact quite a game changer for microinsurance policies. And there was a recent decision in South Africa, it was the Mahadeo versus Dial Direct case, where we see this is now actually being written into law, where it says that if an insurer requires certain information, then they must in fact ask it. And here we see that the microinsurance policies are in fact legislating that decision which came out of Mahadeo. So very, very interesting to note that when it comes to microinsurance policies, which can obviously lead to a much fairer outcome for these individuals. Also, just as far as administration fees are concerned, a microinsurer or any other person on behalf of a microinsurer may not charge the policyholder any administration or similar fee in respect of that service. So that's also very different from what we see with your other typical types of insurance policies. Now, this then leads me
Dr.
to the role.
Dr. Yunaber, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Can you please wind up in a minute and a half?
Oh, okay. The role of digitalization. Okay, so digitalization obviously brings opportunities to better serve customers and their changing needs. So obviously we can utilize digitalized platforms to better cater for these lower income earners. So how can digitalization now actually be utilized to promote financial inclusion? Well, we can provide better access to financial products. So what we can do is we can make use of mobile technologies and payment systems through all the various life cycles. As you can see here on my screen, we can actually use financial or mobile technology to make sure that we have the right products. Products are designed for the correct market. We can use it in the underwriting process, contract signing, premium payments, claims management. This can all be done through the use of mobile technology. Very interesting startup. I would love to talk to everyone about these insurtech startups in South Africa. Lumkani is actually offering microinsurance products to people in informal settlements where we know that fires are rife, and this generally leads to leaving people destitute. So Lumkani are actually offering people microinsurance fire policies to protect their houses and their belongings. So if you'd like to know more, you can contact me and I will definitely tell you all about that. But basically now, how can we use digitalization? Well, in South Africa, it's estimated that the country's smartphone penetration has reached 91.2% in 2019. So it therefore seems viable for insurers to market, procure, and manage microinsurance products through mobile applications. In conclusion, digital platforms may provide faster, easier, and less costly access to many consumers that are currently underserved within the financial services industry. We've got the product, we have microinsurance, so we have a good product. However, how do we get the product to the people that need it the most? And this is where technology and digitalization may assist in providing better reach to these underserved customers. But I also just want to reiterate that it will not address all the issues of financial exclusion. It can play a part in bridging the gap, but we know that consumer education, consumer protection, and enhancing financial literacy remains a core issue. But I do believe that technology and digitalization can bridge that gap, and it's how we can get a good product like microinsurance to the people that need it the most. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yunaber. I'd like to introduce our third speaker for the session, Mr. Louis Hoon, who would be discussing strengthening informal cross-border traders, cooperatives for equitable digital trade. Mr. Koon is an assistant lecturer and a doctoral candidate in the Faculty of Law at the University of Johannesburg. He has presented at various international and local conferences on sustainable development, labor, international economic law, and publishes on these topics. His research primarily focuses on the interaction between sustainable development, including attaining decent work, and international economic law, focusing on vulnerable groups such as informal economic workers. Over to you, Mr. Koon.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I'm just quickly going to share my screen. Thank you. I'm assuming that everybody can see my screen. Let me just put it in slideshow. Okay, so what I'm going to look at is then how we can strengthen cooperatives to encourage greater participation by informal cross-border traders in digital trade. So, and this is really because what we've been seeing across the continent is a substantial rise in digital trade. And here, when I'm talking about cross-border trade, it really is affected by regional trade laws as well, because ultimately it's, for example, South African traders who are trading with persons in neighboring countries. So a lot of times when I discuss access to digital facilities and access to devices, I'll not only be looking at the rate in South Africa, because it's required that those in neighboring countries have access as well. And of course, there's a vast difference between South Africa and some of its neighbors. So those are all just relevant points to keep in mind. And looking at the conceptual framework to look at who is an informal cross-border trader. And here I want to make it very clear that an informal cross-border trader does not necessarily engage in informal cross-border trade. And that seems like an unusual thing to say, but that is because informal cross-border trade is a term that is used within trade law circles and generally refers to trade that is not captured in official statistics or where no lawful border crossings were used. Now, of course, there is a component of this that does take place within informal cross-border trade, but that is not necessarily what makes someone an informal cross-border trader. So the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and UN Women also look at the status of the trader, not the trade, when we talk about an informal cross-border trader. It refers to the informality of the trader and not whether they used officials' customs procedures. So an informal trader can use a formal customs port and still be an informal cross-border trader. And really when we talk, or when I talk about informal cross-border traders, the definition conforms with the ILO recommendation concerning the transition from the informal to the formal economy. What we're really looking at there is whether these individuals are covered sufficiently in law or in practice. And of course, if you are not covered sufficiently in law or in practice, that is where informality comes in. So this is a broad definition, and it's really a useful definition when we talk about workers in the informal economy. And the same applies to informal cross-border traders. So even where they cross customs procedures lawfully, the trader may remain informal because they're insufficiently covered by formal legal arrangements, and then logically that excludes those individuals who engage in the list of excluded items in the ILO recommendation. So it does not, for example, include individuals who trade in drugs and the like. I just want to be very clear on that. And what we see in terms of products that's traded quite frequently by these traders is things such as fruits and vegetables. So for example, the majority of the fresh fruits and vegetables on the Mozambican market are purchased by informal cross-border traders in South Africa, and those goods are then taken into Mozambique to be resold there. And as with the informal economy in general, one needs to be very careful about making assumptions about these individuals, because they are not a homogeneous group. So it would be wrong to assume that they are all the same, because when we talk about informal cross-border traders in Southern Africa, we're talking about a group that is generally more literate than many of the other workers in the informal economy. So for example, around a quarter of them have tertiary education, but there are no jobs available within their home country, and this then sees them entering the informal economy. But as these workers then enter into digital trade, and some of them already engage in digital trade, albeit in a rudimentary way, and I'll discuss that a bit as well. So looking quickly at what e-commerce is, because as I said, some of them already engage in e-commerce, and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development says that e-commerce generally refers to the production, distribution, marketing, sale, or delivery of goods and services by electronic means. So it's quite broadly defined, and it includes this, what I call rudimentary engagement with informal cross-border trade that these workers do, for example, where they accept orders via WhatsApp and then arrange to have this delivered. And within the African continent, this is quite an important way in which intra-African trade is done, because around 40% of all of the intra-regional trade is these informal traders who then deliver these goods using bicycles, making use of public transport. And of course, the pandemic has created significant challenges for these workers in this respect, because although they have digitalized the acceptance of orders, the actual physical delivery of the goods is still largely done in the conventional way, whereby these workers physically deliver the products themselves. And going back to as I discussed, the gendered face of informal cross-border trade in the continent, with 70% of these traders being women, we can also not ignore the gender gap in terms of access to digital tools within the continent. So, for example, studies indicate that the access to internet among women is around 25% lower than among men in the African continent. And what we don't have is enough data about whether the informal cross-border traders are equipped with the digital skills needed to really make full use of the rise in digital commerce. And the main challenge is, of course, that in South Africa, there's also quite a divide in terms of the quality of network coverage we have across the country, with some parts of the country having very good internet access and other parts of the country having less than ideal access. So these are all kinds of inequalities that would also have an impact on digital trade. So although these digital tools offer a number of interesting opportunities for these women, there are also barriers that needs to be addressed, and we need to look at how we can make this more inclusive. And part of what we can do, or what has proven to be quite effective, is if we use cooperatives. Cooperatives offer a good opportunity to improve access to tools, and there are a number of other benefits to cooperatives as well, in addition to really offering an opportunity to access these digital tools and the training, of course, within the cooperatives that these women could then access. Because this has also been another part of the concern, is that some of the women feel less confident using these digital technologies to place orders. And what we saw during the pandemic is that as these tools became more widely used, particularly within the Great Lakes trading facility area or trade facilitation area, is that cooperatives were able to continue trading throughout the pandemic. So as South Africa went into lockdown, our informal cross-border traders could not trade in the way they had normally done, because they would not be able to cross borders using bicycles and the likes. There were very limited exceptions, particularly at the height of the lockdown, for large trucks, for example. And what these cooperatives who worked together did is they could accept orders from their counterparts in the informal economy in Mozambique, and then they could collectively ship these goods, because for one trader to ship goods on their own would not be possible, because you would need a fairly large order to send all of the goods across the border using a truck. And what these traders who work in cooperatives could do is they could then collectivize all of their orders and place it on a single truck and send it across the border to their counterparts in the who also generally trade in the informal economy in Mozambique. And that has a critical impact for food security in the continent as well. The continent really depends on these traders to move goods quite rapidly into different areas, as they are generally more responsive to changing market demand as this comes in. Then, of course, Dr. Yunaber spoke about the access to microinsurance. And this is also generally through cooperatives. We have generally seen these workers having better access to products such as insurance, which for them is quite important, particularly back when they were physically crossing borders, because sometimes what happens to these women is that as they cross the border, they get robbed in the neighboring country, for example. They lose their goods and their funds, which has in some instances seen these women becoming stranded in other countries, and they are unable to return. So it's really important that they have access to these financial services that would enable them to actually continue their business, but also to return to their home country. But regrettably, when we look at the legislative framework in South Africa surrounding cooperatives, it's not really a conducive framework to encourage greater registration of cooperatives. And that might be why there are so many of these traders who don't actually trade within cooperatives. So traditionally, Item 6 of the, or Schedule 6 of the Cooperatives Act specifically excluded all workers within a workers' cooperative from protection in terms of labor law, but specifically included them in terms of social insurance legislation, such as the Unemployment Insurance Fund. And this was problematic to say that they are automatically excluded from labor law, but at least this specific inclusion in terms of social insurance had some positive effect. So the state then worked on the amendments of the Cooperatives Act, and these amendments entered into force in April 2019. And these amendments now bring about a system whereby the traders are neither specifically included nor specifically excluded from labor and social insurance legislation. They are included if they meet the definition of an employee as defined in the various different pieces of legislation. But here it's, although the intent of the state was to make it or to encourage more of these workers to join cooperatives, but also to actually give them the protection and take away the specific exclusion, it might not have been all that useful, because shortly before the amendments came into effect, the Labour Court in the Glamour Fashions case had already said, that's Glamour Fashions versus the Textile Workers Union, had already said that these workers within a cooperative are not employees as defined in labor law, because if you are in a cooperative, you are not working for another person. You are part of the cooperative as a collective whole, and you cannot therefore be an employee under labor legislation. So by now tying it specifically to you needing to be an employee, the amendment might actually amount to a regression in protection. So it remains to be seen if this will encourage more workers to actually join cooperatives. And there needs to be some serious discussions around how we incentivize these workers to join cooperatives. Because yes, there are opportunities within digital trade, but there is unequal access to the opportunities within digital trade. And cooperatives can contribute to alleviating this, but the incentives for workers to join cooperatives are not as clear as they should be. And part of that comes in with a legal framework that is not very conducive. The other challenge, of course, we have is the ease of registration and all of that. Now, that has been simplified quite a bit, and it should generally not present too much problems. But if we could perhaps revisit the way we have excluded them from the cooperatives or from labor and social insurance legislation, that would be quite important. And then the other thing, of course, relates to the benefits. And Dr. Yunaber also said, when we talk about financial inclusion, and specifically she referred in relation to microinsurance, that it must be designed for the target market. And much of the traditional South African social insurance system is not really designed for these types of traders. It does not suit their specific needs, and that is something else that might need to be revisited. So could we use social insurance to incentivize more of these women to also join cooperatives, which should also contribute to them having access to greater digital tools? And hopefully also contribute to a reduction in this gendered gap in terms of access to digital services. I'm going to end there, and then if there are any questions, thank you. I think I'm perfectly on time.
Thank you, Mr. Kuhn. I'd like to introduce our final speaker for today's session, Dr. Arun Prasad. We'll be discussing big data business models, social and ethical concerns. Dr. Arun Prasad is Area Head Humanities and Commerce at Institute of Law, Nirma University. He is doctorate in the area of health economics. He has been involved in curriculum development and academic administration, along with teaching courses related to economics, entrepreneurship, and allied areas such as micro, macro economics, economic development and policy, money and capital market. He has also co-edited a volume titled Artificial Intelligence, Law and Policy Implications. Over to you, Dr. Prasad.
My screen is visible?
Yes, you are visible.
Fine. So I say good afternoon to all my friends and colleagues in India, and good morning in South Africa. I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to share my ideas on big data business models. And I see that the timekeeping has been very tough from Dr. Varsha Ganguly. So may I ask some bias, some data bias towards me? So today's talk is big data business models, social and ethical concerns. Let me start with a philosophical quote by a great philosopher called Bentham. So Bentham has said that man has two masters, pleasure and pain. Throughout evolution, we have seen that we want to maximize our pleasure, benefits, and profits and we would like to minimize the pains. So when we look at the development in terms of technology, we moved from tools, then to mechanical devices, to energy saving devices, analog devices, digital devices. Today we are in the age of data, followed by analytics, and then all this is going to lead to artificial intelligence. Before I begin discussing about big data, let us have a balanced view when it comes to technology. And all the speakers have summarized one thing, that is, technology is going to help us. And sometimes it is also going to pose social and ethical concerns. I'm a great fan of Usha Madam, the way she provokes and talks about human rights and what are the dangers of technology. But at the same time, let us take a view that technology is going to also further our cause as humanity. And at the same time, there are certain red lights which we have to keep watching. So today, let us first look at the kind of data which is emerging. So here it is said that by 2020, 44 zettabytes of data it is going to be produced, and that is going to be the level of IT traffic. And the volume of data created by 2020, it is 300% up from 2015. Let me just give a small perspective about zettabytes. It is 2 raised to the power 70. That is the amount of data that we are generating. So if that is the amount of data which is getting generated, then how this data is going to be captured by people, by businesses, by government? And I tell you that most of the data, when it is emerging from your devices, the IoT devices, it is mostly unstructured. Sometimes it is content, text, audio, video, images, social media, and other public channels. These data sets, they are going to give some cues about your behavior, and these data sets are captured by the enterprise. So from society, this data is emerging. It is captured by the enterprises. So what they do is they sort the data, they align the data, they clean the data, and then make it useful. Once this data is comprehensively studied across 24/7, certain patterns emerge. And these patterns, over a period of time, they become the big data. Which means as consumers, as producers, as male, female, as aged, as technocrats and workers, in every role of our life, 24/7, we are generating data. Now, when this data is put in a pattern form, then that is getting use and money value in the market. So once you look at the big data environment, you see that it has volume, huge amount of volume is there from different sources. And this volume is also having a lot of heterogeneity. It has a lot of variety. So structured, semi-structured, and unstructured, that is how the data emerges. Further, it has speed to its advantage. Let me tell you that in 1 second, there are some 2000 patterns emerging from just Facebook. And then this data is also going through a feature called veracity, the degree to which big data can be trusted. So cleaning process of the data is there, and then business value and variability. Over a period of time, this data can be used from different perspectives. So the 6 features of big data, they actually create a lot of market value. So with this market value, we have to see from where the data is going to emerge, from where it is coming up. So it is coming from your laptop, all types of IoT devices, the sensors on the road, the satellite, which is also picking up a lot of data from the ground level, and from different devices. When this data is getting captured, it is always converted into meaningful data sets. So let me show you some data sets which people have captured, how these data sets are seen. For example, behavioral pattern of a healthy 80-year-old woman. So what are the different patterns of the behavior? Sleeping is one behavior, grooming, getting ready for bed, watching TV, how many hours of TV, what kind of TV. Further, there will be classification of these data points. Cooking, eating, seated activity, all this is the kind of data that you are generating 24/7. This can be compared with a child. This can be compared with an aged male or female. On the right hand side, you can see behavioral pattern of an 81-year-old female Alzheimer patient. So from a point of view that comparison becomes the most important thing, and after comparative analysis, you will see some common data points, and these common data points can be used by big corporations. So after all, why do we need big data? Because we can actually explore behaviors of people of different dispositions. And with this, further applications will emerge. Now you can see a company called Sophia, which is also having presence in parts of South Africa. It is looking into areas such as oncology, hereditary cancer, cardiology, metabolism, and pediatrics. And the good thing about big data is it has not only the ability to compare, but also dispose of the data in different perspectives, in cultural settings, in geographical settings. So as a scientist, as a person who is using this data, a lot of applications are there. And that is how further network of hospitals are involved. More than 55 countries are involved, and lakhs of patients are also tested on a daily basis. And all this data is going to be stored and analyzed for the well-being or for use in the market. So it is always a debate how market is going to see it. For a moment, if you imagine yourself as a market participant, what you want from the market? You want from the market benefits. You want to aggrandize your profits. You want to create further, your customer base. There can be number of applications, and that is where big data is important. And I tell you that there are a lot of applications of big data. One of the applications which is globally practiced and which can be felt by various stakeholders is about your DNA data. So people have looked at this as a big business model. And can you find your ancestry by looking at your DNA sequencing? Can you really pinpoint from which continent you emerged, or the particular ancestry came from? Now this is very much possible in the presence of big data. Now from your background, various data points can emerge, and you can finally say to exact which generation your ancestors emerged from. So the population ethnicity that we are talking about, it can be discovered over a period of time. And this is an interesting study which is helping in medicine, in anthropology, in behavioral studies. A lot of applications are there when it comes to the DNA sequencing. The structure of big data, when you see, I can locate the different industries on this slide. So there can be credit and market risk analysis by the banks, fraud detection. So what is your history? What are the different types of transactions that you have done? Social network analysis can be done. Event-based marketing in financial services can be done. Claims and tax fraud in public sector. Predictive maintenance in aerospace. Sentiment analysis, I tell you, that this is a big thing which is coming up, what exactly people feel. And based on the sentiment meter, you can also locate the political preferences, and that goes a long way in planning your elections. Some will say that this is a fraudulent practice. Even I agree with that. Ethically, it is not right. But after all, there should be some mechanism to find out, even for better use, what is the sentiment of people, what do they believe. Even for policy makers, this is going to be important. Similarly, for disease analysis, electronic health records, text mining, traditional data warehousing, and video surveillance and analysis. I want you to go to YouTube and find out how many live cameras are there on YouTube. And I will see, and you can see that across the countries, live cameras are working, they are recording the data. And this might be taken as surveillance or the big state which is stepping up. But at the same time, this may also help protecting citizens and their interest. So that is why the data which is available in unstructured or semi-structured or structured manner, this is going to be used in a real-time manner. Data velocity is going to increase, and that is how we can capture the major behaviors, whether at a micro level or at a macro level. So further, we can see that what is the level of data which is coming out of different social media platforms. Look at Facebook, 10 TB daily. Okay, so from a country's perspective, this is a big thing. And Twitter, you can see IBM, Microsoft, Google, all of them are going to use big data in some or the other way. And a recent survey which was done by Economic Times India, it says that more than 95% of the business and government, the people who are decision makers, they believe that big data is the next big thing. And it may make a big difference between bankruptcy and business success or policy success. And that is why there is relevance of this big data. However, this big data emerges from users, application systems, and sensors, and large and growing files across cloud computers and across the computers we hosted in different continents. They are going to make a real-time analysis of behaviors, and this might appear to be a danger for for data privacy and other concerns. But at the same time, data availability many times helps a lot. We have seen in COVID times how Johns Hopkins, in real time, they helped different countries, decision makers, doctors, and physicians, what kind of spread is happening. And without the big data mechanism, all this would have not been possible. So there are good things also about the data collection process. And this slide, we will just pass through the different mechanisms by which the data is created and collected. Mobile, microphones, readers, scanners, science facilities, programs and softwares, cameras. These are the different ways in which the data is getting collected. So you can see the volume and the worth of the data, and that is why there is a lot of importance given to big data. So potential value of big data, because we have to see exactly how many people are involved. You can see people were talking about IT professionals some years back. Now it is not only the IT professionals. We need further technical assistance in order to really make good use of the big data which is coming up. So graduates in maths and science, engineers, economics, and MBAs, PhDs, all these people, when they come together, they make the workforce when it comes to the big data environment. Now, I'm interested in expressing what are the different models in which the big data business works. So the first model, basically there are three models. The first model is known as data as service. Now imagine you as a company who is interested in locating the data. So how does the data emerge? I've already said that IoT devices, all devices that you are using connected with the internet, in order to have the real-time data, you need those devices. So if data is the service or the emerging point of this particular environment, what can be the strategy employed by the companies or the governments? So have you seen lately that many instruments are given free to the people? As the cost is reducing for the instruments, you can see all across, whether it is a multinational corporation or a government or any other small business, they want to proliferate market with IoT devices. Over a period of time, there has been a 30% reduction in the IoT devices. You may say that this is happening because of the production. You may say it is because of the efficiency of production. But when I look at the big data environment, I see that this is not happening by chance. This is happening by a specific design, and the design is to capture more and more data. And you can see that third-party data sources are there. They are aggregated. Cleaning process is done to the data, and then data is provided for a particular solution. Suppose you are running a tuition class, you are interested to know what kind of students are going to be there, what are their preferences, what is their age structure, how much money they are willing to give. Now, in order to really capture them, first of all, you need to proliferate the market with a lot of devices. And that is what is happening right now, because the value of data itself is higher than the devices. You can see whether it is a mobile phone, whether it is a sensor or any kind of device that you're going to use on a daily basis, the prices are incrementally coming down. And that is why the beginning of all the big data environment is hidden in the IoT devices. So there is a collusion of sorts between the people who are providing data and people who are processing the data and the device market. And that is why there is incremental reduction in the price of the device market. So,
Dr. Prasad, sorry to interrupt, but this is a gentle reminder for winding it up in 2 minutes.
Quickly. So the second part of the discussion is that what can be the second model. Apart from this, you can see here answers are a service, and before this, information is a service. So when it comes to information, people have to really attract the people who want information to the market. And further, you have to look at the problems, general problems that people are facing. So a lot of research is going on in the industry in order to locate the answers. And then there is a whole new market for answers. So now, while we talk about the emergence of the data and how it is going to be used in the three models, there are a lot of questions which are connected to the ethical considerations. What are the principles to be followed, whether integrity and values are going to be there or not. Now, here the general consideration that we have to keep in mind is whether intrusion is happening at a physical level, at a personal level, or in protective space. Similarly, the dignity, which is an important thing. So the recent literature in social justice, it is moving from the traditional conception of social justice to human rights, marginalization, questions of exclusion and inclusion. And from that perspective, you can see autonomy, identity, and equality. These are equally important questions which needs to be addressed. While we have so much data, what has to be done with the data? Will it be used for a few corporations or for the goodness of the entire society? That is a big ethical question that we see from this perspective. So you can see the balance of forces has shifted in the networked age. People are now public by default and private by effort. So this is what we see when Pew Research conducted surveys across the globe, especially to Americans. People said that they are losing control of their personal information. and what can they do, whether they can do something about it. Answer is no. Similarly, privacy is an important contextual question. In what context, whether it is national security versus privacy, or it is going to be the dignity of a person and other considerations which are related to privacy. So privacy is going to be the foremost discussion point when it comes to the big data. So if you want to consider a question whether your health records, if they are kept online, and even if it is not disclosed, will you be worried? Answer is 50-50. Almost it is 50-50. People are not very much concerned. If the data is going to be even kept on a website, there is a fear of data spread, for which people are not very much agreeable to the use, the way big data is getting used. Similarly, can I watch your movements? So recently there is a company which is marketing itself heavily, saying that can we give you a free device, but the free device is going to record your movements, what you do. And this question has been again answered, that people are not accepting, even if something is available at free, zero cost, the movement and the value of the data, and why I should share my movements with the world. That is the question people are asking. Similarly, whether I do have any control over the data which I am serving. So I can just run through the presentation because I'm losing time. But the serious questions, people who are looking at surveillance, or people with knowledge or without knowledge, both of them are equally looking at different behaviors with caution. Because, for example, when I go to social media, or even when I go for WhatsApp chats and text, sending emails, there are concerns whether the government is going to have surveillance program behind me or not. And this skepticism leads us to many other examples when it comes to case by case analysis. Let me look at one case which is already there in India. It is known as AgriStack. So the deal between Indian government and Microsoft is, you give us the data about the farmer, and in return we will ensure that the crop production and other agri variables are bettered in your country. Now the question that we have to raise is, by sharing all this information, am I also sharing sensitive information such as the Aadhaar card, the identity information of the person, and through that am I also offering indirect access to algorithm based decision making, which can be used by a bank, which can be used by a fintech company. So this is a quandary that we have to address. While we are going to get benefits through the AgriStack, what is it that we are losing at the same time? So maybe the farmer sensitive information, and especially these farmers are going to be poor. So in what exact manner exclusion or inclusion is going to happen is a big thing. Similarly, let's look at fintech companies. So people are saying that let us spread. And some minutes back, we heard a speaker talking about microfinance. So while microfinance is good, but what are the operational costs for the individual who is going to share this information over the devices? Am I going to be tracked for my financial behavior? Am I going to be arrested when it comes to my economic freedoms? What do I save? How do I save? Where do I make payments? All this information will be out there, and that is the cause of concern when it comes to fintech companies. I'm just going to conclude in a minute. And finally, we look at the social security numbers. So there are a lot of benefits. Let me tell you that still recently and even now, we don't know how many poor people are living in different states. States have not disclosed the exact numbers. And I suppose that kind of survey is going to take a lot of time. However, Aadhaar, while it gives you identity, it also has a risk of being used against you in the big data environment. So social security versus big data, that is again a controversial question that we have to answer. And We have also seen, I have studied that in different parts of the world, the other gender, the LGBTQ community, it is getting targeted, and in different courts and jurisdictions, they have filed cases talking about big data and targeting, specific targeting of their preferences. So should we look at gender-based dialogue? What are the dangers of sharing this information in an environment which is not highly regulated, which is not sensitive to human rights and social causes? So this is another important area where big data is going to make a dent. So I conclude my speech, and I would like to definitely say that a book, Weapons of Math Destruction, it talks about how big data increases inequalities and is a threat to democracy. That book extensively talks about the different ills that big data has created and the algorithms and the modeling which is done using the data, and how it is going to be a menace for some sensitive issues and communities across the globe. So that is what I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. We'll now open up the session for Q&A. You are welcome to send any questions that you have in the chat. I do have a question for Dr. Ramanathan in terms of the Aadhaar system that you mentioned. I do find it quite concerning because, like, in terms of balancing or in terms of like conflicting your rights to like privacy versus your rights to health, as you mentioned that if you're not on the system, you will be excluded like from health rights. So I'd just like to get your opinion, like your personal opinion on that. And has there been any cases or has there been any education in India that dealt with that issue?
Sorry, are we collecting questions or should I just answer now? You're the chair, you tell me.
You can respond and then you can take the other questions.
Okay. Actually, when in 2018, when the case was being heard, actually in 2017, when the privacy case was being heard, that's the first publicly recorded case of a child of 11 dying because they were not able to link up, the family was not able to link up their UID number with the food system. So it was in 3 stages. Everyone had, everyone who wanted to enter the food system, which is subsidized by the state, they would have to first get themselves a UID number. Then the number would have to be linked to the food system. And then every time they went, they would have to use their biometrics to authenticate themselves. And then they would be entitled to get their food, get the grains. But what happened with this family was that they had the UID number, but they were not able to link it with for whatever reason, because these are, we are talking about people who are very vulnerable and who are in distress. So since they weren't able to do it, they were not able to get the food that they used to get earlier from the government system. And so the 11-year-old child died. It was a huge scandal when it happened. And then we found that this kept happening and various forms of exclusion, some of it not necessarily resulting in death, but various forms of exclusion where people couldn't get their social security pension, where scholarships couldn't be got. Problems like this started coming up. For instance, persons with leprosy don't have fingers which they can use. They have eyes that are a problem. They found themselves getting excluded. In the case in the court, there were a series of affidavits that were filed, which were actually, for instance, for the persons with leprosy, we had said, no, you tell us and we will file on your behalf. And they said, no, we want to speak to the court and tell them what a hard time we are having. So a number of these were filed in the court. And unfortunately for us, the majority in the court, which, they were looking to uphold the system. So there were a lot of things that were done to help uphold the system. And the court basically said, there are people who have come to court with this affidavit, but we find that the government is saying that, that this hasn't happened, and we are in no position to judge this. So we will depend upon the government to set it right. Why I'm telling you this is also because this morning I was reading of two very recent cases. One, again, to do with persons with leprosy, and the other to do with people who are older than 60 and therefore entitled to old age pension, who were not able to get it, the elderly, for instance, because their UID, on the UID system, they were registered as being 35 and 39 years old, whereas they're actually close to 70. So there are lots of things in this. I mean, the presumption that technology will be value neutral, that the presumption that technology will produce only accurate records, the presumption that the poor can actually engage with these systems and that the digital divide will not do anything to them. So we have hosts of this. I've actually been collecting over the past year and a half everything reported in the press that I'm able to cover, and it's like every week we get 2, 3, 4 such reports. So your question is very important, because there is a way in which in mainstream discourse, these are considered to be cases of exclusion, which are the exception. What we are in fact finding is that this is not a case of exception. This is what people are experiencing. And there is no feedback system, so we don't know how widespread it is. But if you just walk around in these parts and keep asking, you'll find everybody's had, I'll give you one illustration and stop. In collecting food, for instance, if there are 5 members of a family, if any one member of the family has one fingerprint that works, then they are able to collect the rations. So then the system says, see, it worked. Whereas what we are seeing is that you have 4 people and 9 fingerprints that don't work, and it doesn't seem to worry anyone. This is how exclusion keeps getting denied. So yes, there is a huge problem. We have a lot of records on it, including records that were given to the court. It's not a happy story. Sorry.
Ma'am, just to follow up on that, I mean, there's something very interesting that Arun sir said, and I'm just thinking out loud. But this concern, this Hobbesian concern for security, right? Security and isn't that, I mean, we're still drawing from those old ideas of security and threat to life in order to even justify these technologies and of surveillance, or if we want to call it surveillance or not, or whatever else that we want to call it. But that is a very legitimate argument to make, right? That people justify the use of cameras and surveillance at every place because they want to be secure. So how do we really argue against something like that? That security is still a fair concern, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't worry about the argument. Actually, the thing is this, that you'll find that many of these technologies this use of technology is being brought to us by putting a certain kind of fear into us. So one kind of fear is what you're saying, CCTV cameras everywhere will make us more secure, which is not true. And as we know from a series of cases in this country, where at the critical moment when maybe the people, the dominant persons are committing an offense, you'll find that the CCTV suddenly doesn't work. So like we keep saying, technology is not just some value neutral thing. Technology depends enormously on the technology controller. So who are you secure from and what are you secure in? So the kind of tropes that came up for us was the question of control and power. In an unequal society, technology makes us even more unequal. The presumption that corporations and the state will be using technology only to improve people's lives. If that were true, I don't think many of us would be asking many of these questions. But what we know, for instance, that when the project started, World Bank had a document where they were saying we need to reduce subsidies in all these countries, find a way of cutting it down. So the purpose, and you find that the argument that was made throughout by the government was that, look, we have brought down the cost of what we are spending on, we found so many frauds and so many duplicates, so we've been able to cut them off from the system. They were not people to whom service should have been delivered. And they don't exist. Some of them don't exist, some of them are frauds. So we actually find that it's a question of from where you start looking. Now, if I'm looking at an administrative setup being made, and you don't see any echoes of it, any resonances in power, in control, in authority, in equality and inequality, in asymmetries of information and power, then this would be benign. But we are actually talking about how, which is why I think someday Dr. Arun Prasad and I need to have a long conversation. Because I'm just going to tell you two quick things why we can't afford naivety on technology. One is this thing called, there is it's an imagination, something called the Institute of Human Obsolescence. And the logic of this person is that, listen, workers are becoming redundant in this current kind of use of technology. So but workers have to earn, otherwise how are they going to survive? So you have to find a use for the worker. And what is it that the worker can be useful for? It's called speculativecapital.com. If you go, you'll find it there. You have workers lying, therefore, on these, these benches, and their job is to produce heat. Because today, whether it's your cryptocurrencies or your blockchain and things, they require an enormous amount of energy. So the usefulness of the worker will only be something that contributes to that economy. And today they're going to be worth nothing worth nothing more than producing energy for that blockchain technology. So we can't be naive because the imagination is somewhere else. I'll just give you one quick other and stop, which is there is this report that has come out in May this year from the British UK defense establishment and German defense establishment together have published this report, which they support. It's not from them, but they support the report. It's on human augmentation. And I'm going to just read one thing. They're thinking of the person as a platform. And they say, and it goes very much back to what Dr. Prasad was saying. It says we need to do more to understand the precise effects of nutrition, sleep, and hydration, and their relationship with other areas of the human body to realize yet untapped potential. Technology that improves monitoring will make it possible to individually optimize sleep, nutrition, and other factors to deliver transformational gains across an organization at relatively low cost. I mean, what are we thinking? Is this the future we see for ourselves? Is it all right that they will monitor, the frame that you showed, Dr. Arun Prakash, of that, what are all the things that big data can get information on? Is it really okay? I mean, it's one thing to present it as something that's happening, but I think we really need a solid debate on how we see ourselves as human beings, and whether, in fact, it is about, they even say human augmentation has the potential to impact every facet of our lives and even change the meaning of what it means to be human. These are the ambitions of technology. We can't be naive. So the UID is not a problem just as the UID. It is a data collecting mechanism by which everything about us has to be known to people who have these ambitions. So, I mean, that's the reason I get my decibel level goes up when I talk about this much more than it does about other subjects.
Thank you. But just before moving forward, I think I'd like to thank everyone for the presentations. Usha ma'am, of course, as she has, I think, just built on in her comments to the questions, I think she's just built on the presentation that she made. And she said something very interesting about being a techno-skeptic, and I'd like to really know what that means. And I would also like to thank Dr. Yunaber and Dr. Cohen for the presentations. I think they raised some very interesting points about how digitization is actually leading to inclusivity, perhaps in South African in South Africa. It's also interesting to be hearing and listening to these thoughts, because it's coming from India. It's almost counterintuitive right now to talk about technology and inclusivity and digitization and fairness. So I would actually like to ask both Professor Huenberg and similar concerns actually of exclusion and unfair exclusion, because Dr. Cohen, when you talk about digital trade and furthering digital trade through cooperatives and by incentivizing cooperatives, I think one concern with regard to digital trade in India has been that it has led to actually the quality of jobs has certainly reduced, but also it has led to a lot of monopoly, right? So big players come in and they take over all these platforms where you sell on. So there's actually a lot of concern within the usual the usual ways of usual businessmen who are not trading online, that this digital trade is going to shift the paradigm completely, in the sense that you become now reliable on these big players for all your sale and all everything. So what would be your response to that? And I think the question in a way could also be directed to Professor Huenberg, because I think she also talked about digitization and inclusivity. So
Thank you very much, Kushal, and that is a very good question, and that's also why I said that the digital divide is a problem, and that's part of why I'm saying that we should also be thinking about how we can be using cooperatives and things like that to help these workers build their digital skills. And as I said, in Africa, both at a continental level and including in South Africa, there is a gender-based digital divide where women have even less access to internet, and these traders are of course predominantly women. So that is part of why I'm saying that it's not just, oh, can we get them into digital trade, because digital trade is starting to grow whether we think it's a good thing or not. So it's the practical realities of the way that trade is going, is that we're seeing a rise in digital trade. But what we need to do is ensure that these other workers, such as the informal workers, the informal cross-border traders, they're not excluded. So how do we make sure that they also have access to the digital tools to engage in digital trade? And for them, really being involved in digital trade is not a bad thing, but it is one of the benefits, for example, with digital trade for them is if we can also improve the delivery service, because right now these women cross borders, and it's quite dangerous the way these women sometimes have to cross borders. They face highly prevalent sexual and gender-based violence and all of these problems, and how can digital trade help to reduce that? But we also need to make sure that digital trade is actually inclusive, so that it is not only the Amazons of the world that see all of these benefits. So yes, it goes both ways. We do need to make sure that there's more inclusion into digital trade as well. And some of that at least can be solved through cooperatives. Of course, it's not the panacea, but it should contribute positively.
Yes, thank you, Kushal. Just to add from the insurance side, this is actually a big issue, and I thoroughly enjoyed Dr. Prasad's presentation, because big data in the insurance industry is currently under a lot of scrutiny, because everyone's speaking about the positive aspects that big data will have for insurance, in terms of we're seeing like a paradigmatic shift from passive insurer to a more sort of risk personalization sort of era. So we're seeing a move away from a very passive insurer and now to a more active stance. And we're also seeing that big data is having a very sort of fundamental impact in premium determinations. But there is a concern that big data will actually lead to discrimination within the insurance industry. And that is that some people might be completely excluded from cover by insurers if they are to base that sort of pre-contractual phase of determining the risk on big data alone. So there is a major concern in the insurance industry at the moment around big data and how that in fact will ultimately lead to some people being completely excluded. And I suppose that is where a balance needs to come in. And big data can play a very important part and a very positive part, but there does need to be that balance where we actually just need to not base everything solely on big data. So yes, something that we are currently facing in the insurance industry and a big problem.
Right. Thank you so much for that response. I mean, I do have something to add to that, but before that, Arun sir, there's a question for you by Siddhika. She says that as you said about the privacy concerns and the target imposition over certain communities and genders, what are your takes on DA technology regulation bill? Because the bill does bring some uniformity and security in bringing control over critical situations, but it breaches fundamental rights, and the accessibility clause under it is not secure enough as provided in the bill.
See, after my short point is whether it is technology which is the enemy or the people who are using it. So one perspective is to say that this technology is discriminating, or you can say it is using a lot of exclusion. The new bill, whatever bill you are talking about, it is going to have a balancing effect. But fundamentally, when you look at technologies like these, they are going to go towards no regulation to semi-regulation to highly regulated environment. Look at stock exchange or the risk that we used to have some years back and now. Did we stop the electronic exchange? No. What were the solutions? It is about the code of conduct, good governance, corporate integrity, and other regulations which can control these behaviors. So my simple understanding of big data is never going to be stopped. It will never be stopped. It is the trend. It is going to be there. The only thing is how exactly we are going to regulate it. What are the concerns that we are looking at, and how we can mitigate through legal apparatus or social action or governmental action.
Okay, thank you so much for that response, answer. Actually, I just have something to say. It's a general question that also I'd like to ask, because what sort of then happens in debates on law and technology, it's also something that has I think ended up happening now, is that we are either debating the good points of technology, or on the other hand we are debating what problems technology leads to, and we say that yes, they're both good sides and bad sides, and we have to be, as Usha ma'am says, we have to be techno-skeptic, if I understand her correctly, if that is perhaps what she means. But in all of this, the question then is, and it's a general question that I'd like to ask everyone, what happens is we are still thinking of technology as something that we as humans make or not make. Technology as an implementation of some scientific research that humans on their own carry forward. And in that sense, then we say that if Aadhaar is bad, or if some policy is bad, you shut it down. But this is what, when I said in the beginning, Usha ma'am, that human being in itself is a technological being, I understand that there's a fundamental shift between the modern technology and the primitive technologies that we talk about. But the idea then is that it's not really in our control. It's not really we as humans who then decide whether technology should exist or should not exist. I'll give you one example of what I am trying to say. So for instance, there are people who are now saying that it's not just the human being who is involved in any technological innovation. It's that thing itself. So for instance, I cannot wrap up this laptop and keep it in my pocket, because the laptop has some some agency of its own in that sense, right? And so in that sense, we can't really dispense with technology. The option of dispensing completely with technology is not there, because it will always be amidst us in the sense of primitive technologies. And not all technological innovation happens by choice. I mean, a lot of factors play a role where we end up with a certain technology. I don't start with a perfect design of a car and end up with that proper design of car, right? So it's a hit and miss process. So a lot of things play a role in it. Now, if we accept this stance of technology, there is something very interesting, that develops, because then we have to rethink our certain legal concepts. So for instance, if we say that we can't really dispense with technology, then how do we think about responsibility? How do we think about legal responsibility? And people say that in a world where you're giving agency to the other subjects as well, then the whole concept of legal responsibility changes, because then you can't really just say that whether it was your intention to do something or not. So if I make a dam and it leads to all the ecological destruction around it, I can't really say that it wasn't my intention to create that destruction. Now, just because I have participated in that activity of creating a dam, or I'm responsible for everything else. So even the idea that we should not dispense with technology is revolutionary, in the sense that it really helps us conceptualize earlier legal concepts in a slightly different way, and that could be made applicable to something like Aadhaar as well, right? So all the data leakages that we talk about, and we say that it was not intentional. Well, it may be intentional or may not be intentional, but the point is that you initiated a project like this, and now if it is leading to all these leakages, then you are responsible. So it actually, thinking about technology slightly differently also enables us to maybe say something important about social justice. So I mean, I have gone on for too long. I hope I've made myself clear, but I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
See, this idea that there are certain things in nature which we discover, which is also part of the kind of technologies that we adopt, that we are not creating them, but they do become technologies of our lives. That's one kind of an understanding of the human being's relationship with nature. What we are dealing with here actually is, I don't even know that we can any longer just call it technology, because a lot of what we are looking at in this period is data. So what is happening is the reduction of people to data. What is also happening is that, see, if we go back and look at when a project like the UID, for instance, started, or many of the other things that are coming up now, there is one kind of thing where you say you use technology to facilitate. And I think both Dr. Kuhn and Dr. Hoonberg were referring to things where it can facilitate. So and both of them said quite clearly that we are not seeing it as a solution. We are seeing it as possible ways by which technology can assist people who are otherwise kept out to be brought into the system. And per se, there is nothing wrong with that. For instance, if you have financial inclusion and you have more people being able to get onto it, financial inclusion is not a problem. It is the reduction of people to data through the use of this thing called financial inclusion, which when you were talking about financial inclusion in the early 2000s or in the late 1990s, when this form of technological use was not seen as the remedy for being left out of the financial system. Now that this has come, it's being subverted to another cause. So fintech companies are being, they're all looking not at what you do, but at the digital footprints you leave behind. And that digital footprints will be used to rediscover or to discover the person. And that's a very different game. One of the things that I find very interesting in these debates is how very often you'll have people say data is the new oil. And if we just go back and look at what oil has done for us in the last 150 years, it's done a lot of very interesting things, like it's opened the world out to us in certain ways. We can travel, there are the energy production has been booked. Today, we are struggling with climate change. We are struggling with, the carbon footprint. Now we are talking about the digital footprint, which is going to be our problem. We can't learn from history unless we are really willing to learn from it. If we find that certain things are too convenient, then it will be difficult for us to be, to look at it. That's which is why I advocate skepticism all the time. And unlike Dr. Arun Prasad, I actually don't believe that there is such a thing as inevitability in these things. These are all human creations. This is not something that nature just dumped on us. It's not the tsunami. So why is it inevitable? And if it is really so bad that after centuries of battling for something, we get fundamental rights, and in 70 years, you say that, okay, we can't have those fundamental rights because it has to be handed over to this thing called the modern way in which we view technology. I don't think that makes sense to me. So I would battle it anyway. Similarly, there are many ideas we are losing. We are forgetting that centralization displaces people's place in it. We are also recasting people as people who commit crime, people who steal, people who make leakage happen, people who are money laundering, people who are terrorists. So this becomes, this also is an answer to your earlier question about security, that the other version of this is national security and the security of monies. So everybody has to be cast as a possible offender, and that will help justify this kind of a system. Just pause for a moment and think. I mean, I find it deeply offensive that every time I have to identify myself to a system to prove that I'm not a thief, I'm not, I'm not a money launderer, I'm not a black. What on earth is this? How did we come to this pass? And how did we come to this pass so soon? It's just taken 10 years and less than 10 years for us to come to this pass. So I just find that the place where, I often use, for the South Africans, I would really recommend that you see films by this incredible filmmaker in our country called Satyajit Ray. And the thing with him was not that he was dealing with new subjects. He dealt with subjects we all knew about, but he shifted the camera from one place to another, and the lens showed a completely different world. It gave a different understanding. I think in technology, the technology controllers and those who are making these technologies and the technological tools, the India stack, to put it in short, are telling us through which lens we need to look at technology. And then to assess it and understand it through that. That makes no sense. There are people who want the world in a certain way. We have to see if that world should or should not be in that particular mode. And one last thing, India has seen, and around the world we have seen, and I think after the debt tribunal during the, at the turn of this century, at the turn of the millennium and things, we know that the poor are seen as burdens on the system. We know by now that the poor are seen as dispensable and redundant. We know that there have been systematic ways in which invisibilizing of the poor and their problems has happened. Technology can either assist that or it can fight it. Today, we find that the poor are being visibilized in ways which makes them more vulnerable. We really need to think about what all these mean.
Right. Just to push it a little, ma'am. I mean, I understand the point that you make, but so for instance, you yourself said in your talk, right, that the technology could have gone either ways. It could have gone in a way where it actually worked for people. Yeah. But so just to defend also Dr. Prasad here in a way. So when I think perhaps what he says is when it is not intentional, that even when we began with the UID project, we did not intend for it to become what it has become, right? Where it has led to. And in that sense, what we are arguing for is subjecting technology and technological shifts to public debate and acknowledging the fact that any technological invention in that sense, or any technological change that we make, is a political process. So involving people in that. But can we really say that it was intentional in the sense that from the moment it started, it was aimed as a big surveillance project that will lead to where it led to.
Kushal, you're still young. I don't like to take all the roses off your eyelids, but I'm sorry, these were intended. See, I'm not sure they knew precisely how this will roll itself out, because it was still an experiment. I can give you evidence after evidence to show you that it was intended. And if you're telling me it was not done with malice, maybe it was not done with malice, but it was done with unconcern for people whom it will affect. And it was done with unconcern, knowing that they did not know enough. So we can just sit and I can show you chapter and verse on it. And this is what we've debated from the beginning, that these are not, ancillary fallouts of what happened. This is where it was intended to go. So you read the first strategy overview document, which came much after the project had begun, and then, which was in 2010 April. Then you read the strategy overview document in 2016. You read the various kinds of reports that have come. You read what is happening with what is Trickle Up. You're telling me that's not intended? Of course it's intended. It's intended that the people will have, that the only resource that's going to be recognized in them is the data that they're going to give up to the economy. This is not an accidental or incidental fallout of this. This is the intention. So I understand that there are certain places where we may not know, certain technology, and when I say certain kinds of activities may have been begun without fully realizing, and you're focused in one place so you don't see what is happening with the rest. This is not one such. This is, you think can a system like this ever happen without centralization? It's intended to centralize. It's a collaboration between the state and technology companies. The technology companies provide them with what programs they want inside the system, and the state takes it. One takes the data for commerce and the other uses it for surveillance. It's a collaboration. There is nothing, if I can see it sitting so far away and they couldn't see it sitting inside there, then they maybe they oughtn't to be doing it at all. And it's also unforgivable when the consequences begin to show. When that first child died, that should have been an alarm going off. It not only was not an alarm going off, it was justified. And I can send you the video link where it was justified. So these are not innocent exercises.
Thank you for that. Nicole, do we have any other questions? Or if Professor Yunaber or Kuhn would like to respond to any of that also.
There's no further questions on my side. Thanks, Kushal.
I just have one more thing. May I just say it?
Yes, please.
Yeah, there's some, as a lawyer, I don't read a lot of books on economics, but there is this that I was directed to. It's a book by Daniel Hausman and Michael McPherson. And I found it fascinating because that's the first book on economics. I mean, I've been asking around to say what to read, and I've read some books. I find that that's the first book where I find them saying that there are certain things that are not meant for the market. So, of course, they are not talking about privacy or data, personal information, but they are talking, for instance, organs. You can have organ transplant, but it can't reach the market. The moment you do that, it changes the nature of the game. So there are certain, and I find the idea that there is a moral philosophy even in economics is something that we have to work really hard to impress upon the technology controllers and creators. Or else you're going to, otherwise all this is becoming amoral. It's not, nobody cares whether it's moral or immoral, it's amoral. If it's good for business, let's do it. If experimenting on whole populations is good for business, let's do it. I think that, at least in part, is challenged by this, and maybe we could all take a look at that and debate it another time.
What's the name of the book that you didn't say?
I'll have to look at the name, but the name of the authors are Daniel Hausman, Hausman,
okay,
and Michael McPherson.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramanathan. I just want to ask, is there any final thoughts on the session? any of our other speakers, Dr. Prasad, Mr. Kuhn, Dr. Yunaber, is there any final thoughts that you guys can just leave us with? Brief final thoughts though.
I don't know how I came out. I mean, I've been taken in a very particular manner, and I understand the concerns posed by Usha Madam. In my presentation also, I had given the concerns and ethical issues. I agree completely with you, Madam. But what happens is in academics and in political life, we often have this, finger pointing and what is happening wrong. I completely agree. The point is how we can regulate all this. That would be a positive contribution in this direction. So data is going to be a reductionist strategy. It is not good. Morally and ethically, certain things should not be taken to market. All these issues are right. But at this level of technology, at this level of movement of data, I would be naive to think that, things can be suddenly stopped because somebody is debating that it is wrong. In Aadhaar also, I have a small point that though the major concern is about privacy and how the data is going to be managed, and the controversial points about the state and the hegemony of the state when it comes to how the poor people are marginalized. But one thing that as an economist and as a person who is working with data, I mean, if you look at the family health survey in our country, for a population of 6 crore people in Gujarat, I'm just giving an example. For 6 crore people, the family survey is having a data point of 1,500 people. I mean, this is how India has been planning. This is how I think most of the populated country, and even in South Africa, when it comes to data, we go for the sample set, and that is how major blunders are created. Even when you look at Abhijit Banerjee and the argument that he is posing is, for the success of a good policy, it has to be implemented at a small level, and then further data aggregation is required. So, tell me if I'm wrong. If suppose for 2 minutes we don't take data and no data points are available in our country, everything is going to be supposition. I mean, as an academic, I'm saying that there can be conspiracy theories, there can be negative points about the way data is getting handled. But if you look from a Puritan's point of view, what will you do without data? That is one question. Second, what are the alternative models that you are suggesting? Suppose there is no data, how we can work with people? Are we going to go door to door? What is realistically possible in a country of our size and the mass that we have? How exactly we are going to handle this problem is an important thing. And the last point that I'm saying is that when it comes to morality and correctness, there can be number of things which are wrong. I also agree that 100 things are wrong in our country, and the way the data has been handled, it is completely wrong. I'm not supporting them at all. But if you say that this has to be halted, and this particular movement was only for managing people, I think that would be an overstatement. And let us look at the solutions. What can be the solutions of this problem?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those thoughts, Dr. Prasad. Just turning over to Dr. Yunaber and Mr. Kuhn, if you have any final brief thoughts, and then we will turn to the final parts of this collaboration. Sam, do you have any things to add?
I think that there have been some very interesting and very thought-provoking subjects that have been brought up, and I think this definitely is something I agree with Dr. Prasad here, where he says that the regulations need to come in and really enhance here. And I see at least in the fintech area, I know in South Africa, in terms of the new Conduct of Financial Institutions bill, we are going to approach this with a sandbox approach, which is what they're doing in the UK as well, where they're getting the regulators and the innovators to really work in a controlled environment before actually putting it out there, to make sure that these actually can work, that they are sustainable, and that it can lead to advantages for society at large. So I think this is where the regulators need to come in. They need to work with the innovators, and there needs to be a balance here. So yes, I just thought I would add that. But yes, I think some very interesting thoughts have definitely come out of this session. So thank you.
Thank you so much for those observations. And then just one final, just checking with Louis if you have any points to add.
Thank you, Megan. I'll just briefly add that I agree with both Dr. Yunaber and Dr. Prasad that really the thing with technology is it's moving so fast. It's not an easy thing to think that you're just going to stop it. It's not going to happen. If we look at countries who've tried app bans, for example, we simply see people using VPNs and then bypassing those bans. Or if you're trying to block certain internet services, and I mean in Africa this is quite problematic, but it's really, really difficult to think that you're going to stop technology. So the discussion, I think, should really be about how do we make sure that what there is does not result in the exclusion of people or exacerbates existing inequalities.
Yes, absolutely. I think those are excellent points. Let me hand over now to Nicole to introduce both Elmarie and Varsha to give some words on the collaboration as a whole.
Thank you, Megan. I have the honor of introducing Professor Fourie. Professor Elmarie Fourie is a professor at the Faculty of Law and head of the Department of Public Law. Currently, she is the program coordinator for the LLM in Labor Law and lectures labor law to the undergraduate students and postgraduate students. She was awarded a Vice Chancellor's Distinguished Award for Teaching Excellence in 2010. She has been part of various task teams preparing legal opinions to government departments and drafting legislation for SADC on solutions to extend labor law and social protection to vulnerable women, workers in the informal economy. She has published on labor law, social protection, and legal education in national and international journals. Over to you, Professor Fourie.
Thank you, Nicole. Prof, I don't know if you want to go first. If Nicole must introduce you, and you can go first as the main coordinator of this project. I think that.
Please go ahead, Elmarie, please.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yes, I'm sure of that. Please.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm actually sad that today is the last day of this wonderful collaboration. We started in the beginning of the year, which was just a meeting, and I never ever thought that this will actually happen the way it did. I think it's absolutely amazing. Yes, it's so strange. We've never met in person, but we became friends, and we established this amazing collaboration between India and South Africa. And I think what is so amazing is our endeavors to try and uplift the vulnerable in our society, our endeavors to promote equality and human dignity, because we have identified so many things that are similar in our countries. And as scholars, we are trying to find solutions to achieve equality and human dignity in our various societies. I have to thank Varsha and Megan. You know, we did this, or they did this, throughout a COVID-19 pandemic that hit both South Africa and India quite severely. And there were many challenges, and they always were so professional and dealt with it as it came their way. What an amazing collaboration and organization from both of you. I think Varsha is quite strict. You have to do exactly that at the same time. And that helps us all to give in our papers and our abstracts and our book chapters. And that was an amazing way of coordinating this. So thank you, Varsha and Megan. And Varsha, I really hope to meet you in person in South Africa. And the invitation goes to all the colleagues at NIRMA. We can't wait to host you at our university and show you our law faculty. I also have to thank the people behind the scenes, people who made this Zoom presentation possible, people who made the social media PRO work possible, the program and so forth. We really, really appreciated. Everything ran so smoothly. I also want to say this was such a wonderful opportunity, Vash, and I think it was your idea to provide a platform for our more junior colleagues to be able to host and act as discussants and present. And that was an amazing idea, because in that we developed so many skills. In the end, I think, what is the value of this? What is the value of a collaboration like this? We are finding solutions. We are there to make a difference in the lives of both South Africans and Indians. And nothing can be better than that. There's no better thing for an academic to actually influence policies and changes the lives of our people. So thank you to all of you. I'm so grateful to have been part of this collaboration, so forth. And I hope that there are many others coming from this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Fari. I now have the honor of introducing Professor Vasha Bhagat Kanguli, and she is a professor at the Institute of Law, Nirma University. She has worked with two premier institutions, Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, Missouri, and with Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, as a professor and a fellow, respectively. By actively engaging herself into versatile use of research, teaching, publication, enhancing a cycle of social knowledge and social transformation, and people's knowledge based on ground-up public policy are main areas of work. She is on advisory boards of a couple of networks and philanthropic organizations working on women and land rights and excuse my pronunciation, I'm so sorry. It's the braces.
No problem. Pastoralism.
Thank you. Excuse my pronunciation for that. She has published widely on land rights, land question, citizens' rights and collective actions, and on the marginalized groups in India from the perspective of social justice, and has been an editor of 3 academic journals. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you. I always am very fond of Elmarie's passion and her passionate voice. And so, thank you. And I take this compliments on behalf of the entire team and whosoever has been joined as part of this entire collaboration. I actually, this being the last seminar in the 4th-part series, I actually wanted to take a kind of an overview and looking back in a very reflective manner as an academic and, to put the thing in the perspective of role of knowledge. And as academic, as teacher and researcher, we always feel that, if social justice is a major concern, what are the frameworks that we really take it and further it in the discourse. And I'm so happy that this is, I think, for the first time we have explored social justice continuum from interfacing with law and using the frameworks of substantial equality, discrimination, social exclusion or inclusion, and vulnerability. And I think that one of the success of this collaboration is that we are able to include newer group and able to dialogue, reflect, discuss on newer group like LGBTQ. We looked at CEDAW from a very from a gender perspective, and new groups like gig workers and their concerns for social security, and also the climate migrants and so on. I am also very happy that through this collaboration we are able to sort of address the newly emerging challenges like law and technology, and we have just been through with this session and how it has provoked various thoughts and discussions and line of arguments and schools of thought and so on. we have also been very happy to look at legal education from social justice perspective, and how do we inculcate social justice lawyering, and also coming to a very basic questions like can ethics be taught, and talking about andragogy for teaching ethics and morality, and bringing social justice perspective at individual level and at collective level, and talking about those andragogy in a very critical manner. And so I think putting everything together, we are able to bring two things to the fore. One is articulating newly emerging challenges in the social justice continuum from global south. And second is we are able to share, compare, discuss across two continents. And so therefore, we really find it, it's really a wonderful experience. And towards the end, we definitely feel that, let's this social justice continuum also continue in terms of the collaboration. And I'm sure our deans, our respective deans are speaking about it. And so I will not take much time on that. I just want to express another pleasure and pleasant outcome of this collaboration is that we are planning an edited volume out of this, and all the presentation will be sort of furthering the discourse, expanding the discourse on social justice continuum, as I mentioned earlier. And I think, I am here, and I also want to thank all the participants and all the people who are linked with this collaboration in different roles, and coming from different walks of life. We had social actors as speakers. We had lawyers and law practitioners, law academics, and economists and other researchers, and from a very junior to very senior level of work experience, and we truly could value all the contributions in its own way, and we still do value it in its true essence. And I think yes, we all want to continue this collaboration in some way, and we have been thinking about teaching and conducting research together, and maybe some more things will be evolved. So looking forward to some more enhancing exercises for continuing of this collaboration. Thank you all. And as Megan would be doing vote of thanks, so I'm just very briefly saying thank you all. Thanks. Over to you, Nicole, or Kushal.
Yeah, thank you. So I understand that Professor Domingo will not be able to join us.
But she has sent her message. So can we start with Dr. Madhuri Parekh, and
sure.
then
I'd like to invite Dr. Madhuri Parekh. She's the assistant, she's the director in charge at the Institute of Law, Nirma University. She has been associated with the Institute since 2007, and her research interests lie in the field of environment law. Ma'am has been working in the field of environment law for a really long time, and we invite you, ma'am, to say some words about the collaboration.
Thank you, Usha. Thank you for the introduction and connecting me to this webinar. Professor Elmarie, Dr. Varsha, our distinguished speakers today, Dr. Usha Rahman, Dr. Samantha, Ms. Louise, Arun Prasad, Dr. Arun Prasad, and Mr. Kunal and Ms. Nicole. Thank you all for being part of this the seminar and sharing your valuable thoughts. I express my sincere thanks to both the coordinators first from the Partner Institute to make the seminar a big success on a very apt theme, a social justice continuum in comparative context, Indian and South African perspectives. 4 theme-based talks and webinars have been arranged, and a number of speakers have participated, and the participants were also in good number. And the deliberations that took place, they are on a very contemporary issues, like the role of the state and society in reference to some special categories of the communities like LGBTQI. In the same way, the labor issues and the issues related to climate migrants have been discussed. The legal education and the laws, technology and social justice, these are other themes which have been discussed. And these are the topics which are of contemporary importance, and both the perspectives from both the countries have been shared. And the remarkable thing about this webinar series is the outcome of these deliberations in the form of a book. So first of all, I congratulate both the coordinators and both the partner institutes and all the contributors also to this book, because it will help in understanding the different perspectives on these emerging issues. So it will be a great contribution of this collaborative event. And at this juncture, I express my sincere thanks to the Partner Institute and the faculties and the Dean, Professor Domingo and Professor Toit and Professor Elmary and all Miss Megan, all who are instrument in making this event successful. I also express my sincere thanks to Professor Varsha and my all faculty colleagues who have taken keen interest in shaping this event. The most important part of this event is that it gives opportunity to all the young faculties to share their thoughts and exchange of thought that could take place along with the inputs from the experts. So it's a wonderful event, and we look forward to such kind of events in future. And here at this platform, I would also like to propose that we can explore the possibilities of the next webinar series on the issues related to climate change, because on this point, both the countries are having a similar stand and similar challenges, South Africa and India. So this can be deliberated upon as a part of the next webinar series. So this is my proposal, and I hope that Varsha Madam, we can convey this to our the university also, and the University of Johannesburg also. And apart from it, there are other possibilities also that I would like to explore. That is regarding the collaborative research, regarding the teaching from both the institutes, exchange of you can say faculties, and mainly the teaching in the area of constitutional law, that also we can focus, because there the comparative perspectives will be possible, and that will help much more to understand both the constitution. So these are some of the things we look forward, and please convey my message to Professor Domingo. And I express again my sincere thanks to all the coordinators, all the expert speakers, and to the deans of my partner institute. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So I'd like to now invite Megan for a vote of thanks. I understand Professor Domingo will not be able to join us, so yeah.
Thank you so much, Kushal. Professor Domingo has sent a few words to Prof. Farid to read out. So perhaps I'll just hand over to Elmarie to share those words.
Thank you, Megan. Unfortunately, we have had unscheduled power outages, so you can't schedule to charge your laptop or your phone, and that's unfortunately the situation where our dean is in now. She has not had power for a number of days, and she's out of options. So she's just asked me to please apologize for this, and then just to convey her words to you. So to all our speakers, colleagues and friends from UJ and Nirma University and students, good afternoon to those in India, and it's also good afternoon to those in South Africa now. On behalf of the Faculty of Law at UJ, we have been delighted to be part of the 4-part collaborative seminar series between the Institute of Law, Nirma University, and the Faculty of Law at the University of Johannesburg. India and South Africa draw parallels of inequalities and injustices from socio-cultural and political histories of discrimination. The pattern of economic development and deprivation of the marginalized section and disadvantaged status due to lagging on developmental issues such as education, employment, control of sources of livelihood. While both countries have political equality, there are socio-economic education inequalities and disparities too. The papers delivered over the last few weeks engaged with the global challenges of equality, labor law, legal education, and law and technologies. We engaged in questions and answers and had robust discussions and debates. These seminar series would not have been possible without the following people whom we thank: our speakers, our facilitators, our theme coordinators, specifically Megan and Provasha, and Dr. Parekh. Thank you so much for supporting this project. As stated earlier, we are delighted to be part of this collaboration, where we can bring together scholars from Africa and India to address these global challenges. I look forward to these seminars culminating in a book. We also look forward to upcoming sessions, collaborations, book projects, and hosting all the colleagues from the University of Nirma at the Faculty of Law, University of Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So it now falls to me to do the formal vote of thanks for the session. And we've already thanked a number of people. Let me start off by thanking Dr. Parekh, the Dean of the Institute of Law of Nirma University. Thank you so much for your continued support of this initiative. I'd also like to thank our own Dean, Prof. Domingo, who of course wasn't able to join today, but whose support has really been felt throughout this collaboration. Then our speakers and discussants for today's session. Dr. Arun Prasad, thank you especially for stepping in at late notice, very appreciated. Dr. Usha Rahman, thank you for your really insightful, skeptical voice, which I think was very valuable in the session. Dr. Samantha Yunaber and Mr. Louis Kuhn, always wonderful to have your engagement and working on some very important and emerging issues in the field. Thank you to Nicole and to Kushal for being our discussants and chairs today. We really, really appreciate it. Then thank you to the Assistant Registrar of the Institute of Law, Nirma University, for all of the administrative tasks and for ensuring the smooth operation and running of the webinar and of the documentation. And thank you more broadly to the technical assistance team of the Institute of Law, Nirma University, for all of the running of the webinar and all of your work behind the scenes. We really are grateful for that. Dr. Vikas Trivedi from the Institute of Law, Nirma University, thank you for all of the media and social media coverage before and after the event. It's meant that we've been able to have large participation across the 4 seminars, and we're really grateful to that. Then to all of the colleagues of Nirma University and of UJ, who particularly served as chairs and discussants, Shreya, Anabuti, Arpit, Kushal, Rupa Fadzo, Katlejo, Sershiv, and Nicole, thank you all for all of your efforts. And then finally, Elmarie, thank you on a personal note for your unstinting counsel and encouragement and to your really tireless commitment to supporting emerging and young academics in the faculty. And then really finally, Varsha, thank you so much. The 2 of us have been the co-coordinators of this ongoing webinar series, and also looking forward to the book proposal to the book of the edited volume of essays and chapters emerging from this collaboration. The combination of your broad vision but also your fine attention to detail, I think is really, really rare and has meant that this collaboration has been immensely successful. So thank you for both that, for both the broad vision and also for the nitty-gritty details. We really appreciate it, and I look forward to working together with you on the book. Thank you to all of the participants, especially the students who've joined us today. It's wonderful to have you part of this collaboration, and we look forward to engaging with you hopefully in future collaborations and seminars. So thank you all. That's it from me. I hope that everybody else has a wonderful rest of the weekend, and also looking forward to wrapping up the end of the year. And we will be in touch in the course of the next few months about that book. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, Megan.
Great.
Right, so I guess we can close.
Fantastic. Yes, I think we can close off.